Halacha test. Litzvia ketzat. So we have permission to use Shmita produce to dye things. So how do we? So what's examples of that? You could use things that are normally used as dyes, even though they're human food. So normally we set tovim lehen la'adam. You're allowed to use them as dyes for men. So when I say dye, it probably includes, let's say, cosmetics for women. You're not allowed to dye things for animals from Pirish Shvius, even if it's only animal food. There is no sanctity of Shmita on dyes of. You have the older one is the new one. So meaning so we said highest and best use is you eat human food, you give animal food to animals. So for example, barley really is an animal food. So if humans would be allowed to eat barley during Shmita barley, I'm not sure. Nowadays, though, barley malt or barley flour is an important ingredient. So does that play a role? It probably does, because now those type of things are. I mean, could you make beer? Okay, true. Right, beer. Could you make beer with barley? I mean, in the time of the Gemara, they made beer out of dates. But since nowadays it's but taste wise or smell wise, well, the bear brewers, whatever they're called, became very rich in Bavel. Yeah, it was a very good. And so even if something is a human food, but people use it for dyes or for colorings, you're allowed to do it. It's not considered wasting Shmita food from using it for the actual food. You're allowed to use it as a dye. Now nowadays they add food colorings, all these things. Now they're mostly all synthetic anyway, except the red that uses cockroaches or whatever. But if you would just use it as a food coloring, would that be okay? I don't know. Okay, so Venera, based on the Radvaz, Rav Kook says that you're allowed. He thinks that you feel that you're allowed to use animal food and make them into colorings or dyes for man, even if they aren't usually used for dyes, but you could use them for dyes or colorings. And it's also to make colorings for people from things that usually used to make a paste out of them, a medicinal paste, which we said you're not allowed to do on Shmita, because it's not making it into a medical paste is not the highest and best use of Shmita food, but you can use those types of ingredients to make a coloring. And again, these mlugmos are ointments for medicine that you usually don't eat, but you could use them for coloring or dyes. Yod mine kvusim. So things that you use for laundry detergents could go in borax va'oel. So borax and I think it's an oil. Kedusha shvius chala aleihem. So, well, I don't know for sure if it's borax, because it's something that grows. I don't know exactly where borax is chemical, where it comes from, but maybe I'm translating it wrong. But they obviously they grow from the ground. They do have kedusha shvius. You are allowed to use them to wash your clothes with. Because the pasuk says the Shabbos of the land will be for you. So we say for you, for everything of your needs, according to the general usage of the items, which we're talking about in this chapter. But you can't use Shmita produce for laundry, but you can't use them as a paste. Because you can use it should be for you to eat, but meaning not as a medicinal mixture, not to sprinkle, not to make you throw up. Haki is throw up. Lola Mishra is to soak flax and not for laundry. So let me see here. So I guess these two fruits, boris and oel or ehel or whatever, are only they're used for laundry, but people never eat them. So Rav Kook says the general rule that for the usage of Shmita produce is regular produce which comes not after the biur, not after the time where you have to make it ownerless. So that excludes if you soak flax or launder in Shmita, that the flax obviously is because you soaked it, it's good. Now they actually soaked it for a while. I don't know if it means that the actual soaking took that long, but I think it means even if the soaking was done before the biur, but the benefit that you're having from it remains after the biur. I mean, we mentioned in the Mishnayos, I think we saw it already before. Let's say if you made pickles or whatever, you pickled vegetables after the shasa biur, you'd have to get rid of those vegetables also. The fact that they last longer is not any use to us, because if it's not available in the field for the animals, we can't keep it, even though it could be longer. So, and also we wouldn't scent olive oil, let's say with the rose of Shmita we were talking about. So the scent of that would remain after the shasa biur, so that's a problem. So the fact that the flax was softened, whatever, and it could be able to be made into underwear, because undergarments are made out of flax, I think, or maybe tablecloth, certain things like that. The hana from the fact that it was soaked in a liquid from a Shmita plant, you're getting benefit, not active, but the fact that you're done with that juice, whatever that was, but because now it's usable, because of that, the benefit of the Shmita produce is lasting beyond the biur. That's the problem. That as soon as you soak the flax or the cloves in wine, the wine becomes lost and it is no longer usable, and the hana is so not what I said, is that the hana has to come when you use it. When you're washing it or soaking the flax, the hana, you don't get any hana when you're doing it. It's when it's over is when it's hana. So I guess when they're talking about soaking cloves in wine, it was some way to make it, they had fragrant wines, and it was the main thing to not necessarily to clean the clothes, but then again, it would be great on Shabbos or Pesach if your shirt already was the color of wine. You could spill as much as you want on there, wouldn't ruin your shirt. But the point is that you have to use the perush shvius. The hana is as they're used. But when you're soaking flax, you're not getting any hana from it being soaked. Just once it's done being soaked, then you could use the flax and make things into it, make things out of it. So that's why we're not allowed to do that. And laundry detergents or agents, even though they have kedusha shvius, you're allowed to do laundry with them. How come we don't say, oh, you shouldn't be allowed to do it because the hana is after they're used, not during their use? So the Kesef Mishnah says, we only say that you need to have the benefit from the Shmita produce as it's being destroyed. Now, eating is not really destruction, but it's being consumed, is only in regard to food items. But since this laundry agents are never eaten, that's not a problem. But the problem would be to use something that's not usually a laundry detergent, but is regularly a food. That's what you can't use for laundry. According to this, if we know that certain laundry detergents, that the benefit comes after the Shmita stuff is already finished, then you're allowed to use it as a laundry detergent. again, you're not using food, but you're using some type of plant that can be used for laundering clothes. And the Rambam in Pirush Mishnah and the excuse me, not the Pasha Shulchan says that the requirement that you have to derive your benefit as it is being consumed at the same time, that applies to all Shmita produce, even if you're going to soak or do laundry. But the reason that, so therefore it's not permitted, but the reason that laundry is mutter with a boris and ohel or ehel, and you're not allowed to use wine and in other fruit juices or other things, because things that are which you could eat if you would do laundry from it, then you get hana after, you're getting the benefit after it is being consumed. Because if you use it for laundry, then it becomes, dirty and disgusting, and then you can't eat it anymore. That's when it becomes considered consumed. And then the hana comes afterwards when you do the act of laundry. But when something is a laundry agent and it's not food, you can't eat it, it's not considered destroyed or being consumed when you soak your dirty clothes in there. So it is considered that the benefit and the consumption is taking place at the same time. And according to the Kesef Mishnah, we only say that the consumption and the benefit has to be at the same time if it's a food. The Pasha Shulchan says if it's a food, if it's normally a food, but in fact you do laundry in it, you're making it no longer able to be food. But if it's only a laundry thing, the best use of the laundry thing is as you're soaking the clothes in it. So the hana is at the same time that it's being consumed. According to this, if we know that something for laundry is going to be consumed and no longer existent before the cleaning is done, you would not be able to use your laundry for that if it had Shmita produce, according to that opinion. Okay, halacha yud aleph. Yeah. You could use what? If it's things that grow that are always used for laundry stuff, you can use them for laundry stuff. The machlokas here between the Kesef Mishnah. So that's the question. So the question is, we have a principle that for Shmita produce, they have to be consumed, and your benefit has to be as they're being consumed. It has to be at the same time. So the Kesef Mishnah says that only applies to food products. But since these laundry things we use for laundry are never eaten, that halacha doesn't apply. That's how the Kesef Mishnah learns it. The halacha of consumption is at the same time as it gets this benefit is at the same time as consumption, only applies to food items. This thing that you're using for laundry, whatever these boris and OL are, they are never used for food. So therefore, the benefit and consumption doesn't have to be at the same time. The Pasha Shulchan says that consumption and benefit have to be at the same time, applies even to not food products. But when you're doing laundry, if you're using these laundry things, the benefit for it is when you're actually doing the laundry. So the consumption is at the same time that you're getting the benefit of washing the clothes. Whereas if you use food or wine for whatever reason as your laundry detergent, it was food, and now that you do the laundry with it, you can't eat it anymore. Yeah. Okay, so that's a shaila if you could wait till the next year with Shmita wine because of the bior. But the halacha is that for olives and grapes, their best use is as being liquid. That the Torah agrees that's for everything. So to make wine isn't a problem. But when you made it wine, it's usable for wine right now. You hold it in a barrel or in a bottle, and it's going to last for a few months. I mean, it could last longer than a few months in a bottle, but because of bior, it can't let you have to eat it, or you have to use it before the time of biur. So, but we're saying here, let's say that I had apple juice, and in Israel there's massive cockroaches, right? And I killed a cockroach and I put it in the apple juice. Once I put in the apple juice, no one's going to eat the apple juice anymore. So I caused the apple juice to be wasted. And so that when we say that, so that's what we're saying. If you do laundry with apple juice or with wine, because it was juice, this is what the Pasuk Shulchan says, because it was juice, well, everyone agrees. Because it was a food item, if you would do laundry in it, you're going to ruin it as a food item. And because you're making it ruined and you can't eat anymore, that's a problem for Shmita. But these laundry agents, Boris and Oil, because they weren't food items, according to the Kesef Mishnah, there is no halacha that the consumption and the benefit needs to be simultaneous. And the Pasuk Shulchan says, because it's a laundry item, you're getting benefit as the clothes are in there because it's cleaning the clothes. That is the benefit. So the benefit and the consumption is simultaneous. No, because of biur. So you didn't cause it to waste. Well, we get into machlokes. The way we paskin about biur is that at the time that it's no longer in the field for the wild animals, according to the way we paskin, not according to the Rambam's opinion, but according to the way we paskin, you have to declare it ownerless. But you could declare it ownerless when no one's on the street, so no one's there to hear you declaring it ownerless, and then you can take it back. So the thing is, we're not trying to keep things past the biur, but according to the way we paskin, you could keep it after the biur. According to the Rambam, at the time of the biur, it literally has to be destroyed if you still have any leftover food. But here, the problem is it doesn't have to do with the biur. The problem is that it's the same word, biur there, which literally means burning, like biur chametz. It also can mean consumption. So the halacha is that the benefit of the Shmita produce has to be at the time that it's consumed. So if and you can't ruin. So I guess there's those two rules working in play here if you're using non-Boris or Ehel as laundry detergent. I don't know. So I mean, so right. So you might go into you'll see a month or a little more ago in the series thing about flowers, because cloves are really wood. It's not fruit, right? Really it's wood. So the fact you use it for scents or incense, depending on how you look at it, it would be allowed if it's but if there's smell and people do it for smell, you would have to do, when the Zman biur happens, you would have to make it ownerless. My guess is it would be the same as flowers. Yud Aleph, Klal Amru b'Perish Shvius. There's a general rule they said in regard to Shmita produce. Kolshum yuchad l'baychal adam kagon chitin te'enim hanavam piyotza behem in osin mehem alugma or etiach yotzma filo adam. Anything which is human food, like wheat or figs or grapes, things like that, you're not allowed to use some type of medical ointment or paste or thing like that. Even if it's for a person needs this paste, you're not allowed to put the grapes in there. Shenamar lachem la'achla, the year of the produce of the Shmita will be for you to eat. Kol shehu miyuchad lachem yeh la'achla l'refuah. Anything which is special for you, meaning human food, you can only eat it. You're not allowed to use it for healing. We saw the exceptions before. You're allowed to use oil for rubbing. You're allowed to use oil for your lights, and we just saw you're allowed to use things for dyeing, But in general, it could for balachla, but not l'refuah, not for a medicinal purpose. Things that are not human food. Thorns or soft branches of certain types of trees. You can make a medicinal paste or ointment for a person, but you're not allowed to do it for if your horse has some type of cut that normally you put this paste on it. You're not allowed to make that paste for the animal, even though it is animal food. And then certain things which are not food at all, he says za'atar, oregano, and thyme. So we did not use these translations in our Mishnah when we did this. But they're clearly not food. It depends on his intent. If he picked them just to use as branches, whether for his oven or whatever, then it has a status of wood, and you could use it for malukma because it's not pirush v'yas. Lachila hareu kaperos. But if you did it for eating, then it's like peros. If you picked it, it's I'm going to feed it to my animal, and I'm also going to eat some of it. Then you have to give it the stringencies of human food, that you're not allowed to use it to make it into an ointment. And you also have to use the stringencies of animal food that you're not allowed to cook it. So from this halacha, Marty, you remember I was wondering about people using, let's say, the dandelion leaves or whatever. So that would probably be this halacha, that it's something that it's really not animal food and not people food. It depends on your machshava. So if you picked it because you were going to eat it, and then it would be like a food. So you wouldn't be allowed to make a potion out of it. But I assume dandelion stuff is made and used in some of the medicinal stuff. So if you pick it as just leaves, not as food, then you'd be allowed to make it into a medicinal paste or ointment. Okay. So Rav Kook says only these three species. Let me just find how we translated Azov. We translate Azov as hyssop. Oh, there's a bunch of Azovs. Yeah, hyssop. Pua, does it say Pua? No, Saya. Saya is called savory. And Hornos is thyme. It is thyme. So thyme and hyssop and savory that they grow in fields, they're not designated for people or for animals, and so that's why it depends on what your intent was. But if you had these species that were growing by themselves in your yard, then we'd say that it's for people consumption, because since it's in the yard, it would be for people, and it doesn't matter what your thought is. And they have all halachas of human food. But then he qualifies this, Rav Kook, and says that would be in a yard where the stuff that grows there are guarded or watched. Then it's human food even when they grew by themselves. But if it's some type of yard where they don't keep or care about the stuff that grows in them. So if they grew by themselves, then it depends on your intent when you picked it. And also that's only if it's in the courtyard, but in meaning, so it's not a place where you normally grow things. But the gina, if it was in your garden, I mean, that's the way I'm just translating courtyard versus garden. So this doesn't make sense in the way that I'm using the word, but in a gina, it's usually not for a person, because in a yard, because you could always see it, and you know that you can, when you pick it, when it's going to be picked before it gets too hard or too bad, then it's for people food. But this gina is further away than a courtyard. So therefore, it's not people food, it's not animal food, and it depends on your intent when you picked it. So these three things, savory and hyssop and thyme, that grow in fields, that it depends on your intent when you picked it. If you sold them, what if the person was selling them as people food, but you bought it to just put in your oven as fuel for your fire? So the halacha is there have sanctity of Shmita like food, because we have to go for the stringent way, the way that the seller was thinking about it. What about the opposite? If the seller sold it for wood and you decided you were going to eat it, so even if you change your mind, it's too late. Once you made it into a food, it became a food. Because again, we follow the stringency. So the buyer's original intent to use it as human food, it becomes human food. If the seller was selling it as wood and you bought it also, when the buyer was buying it, was going to use it for food, but when he picked it up, but then when he paid it, by the time he paid for it, he changed his mind and was going to use it as fuel, not as food. The halacha, it's like a food, because the halacha is that really the kinyan takes place when you pick it up. So it's difficult. I think it's strange for us that everything depends on it's yours once you pay for it. In halacha, most things are not yours once you pay for it. Movable things. Real estate is when you pay for it. But anything which is a movable property, it's usually not paying money. Does not affect the kinyan usually. Or if when you paid for it, you thought it was going to be a food. So let's say you paid for it and then you picked it up. So if you paid for it thinking that it was going to be a food, but then when you picked it up, you change your mind to use it as wood. We also have to go strict in this case, because we have to be strict that it follows your intent when you gave the money. If the seller sold it for food and you bought it for wood, but they didn't strike a deal, because the seller was trying to get more money, and the locale, so they were in discussions, but they were haggling over the price. They were negotiating over the price, and then they went home, and then they were in marketplace A, and then they didn't agree to something. Then the next day they saw at a different corner, the same guy was selling his stuff, and the same buyer was in the market to buy, and you bought it with neutral intent. Meaning last night I wanted to buy it as fuel, specifically. The seller wanted for food. But here today, I was just buying it for neutral purpose. If the seller said, okay, let's continue where we left off yesterday, it's a continuation of the previous day. And he said, here's the thing, then the seller has changed his mind, and he has said, he is showing that he's selling it based on whatever the seller wants. And therefore it depends on what the seller wants. But if the potential buyer was the one who said, we were talking about buying this last night, let's talk about it again, and it was stam, then the seller didn't change his mind, the seller was still selling it as food, so we have to follow the fact that it is food and it has kedusha shvius. Okay. This vegetable is, I'm not sure if, okay, called cassia. I have no idea what that is. And the other thing he mentions is okay, this isn't in this book. Check it as Zimra. It's not in my, oh, let me look how he translates it. It's not in my special scientific book here. Oh, it's not in there. So chatzir, I don't know if it also means grass over here. So if you, okay, so I don't know exactly what they did, but you gathered them to somehow make wheat soft with them. I have no idea what that means. Making the wheat soft with grass. So you're allowed to do that with them. But if you get, it can't be grass. If you picked it to for a kid to eat, excuse me. But if you gathered them as animal food, then you're not allowed to soften wheat with them. Again, I don't know what that means, soften the wheat with them, because then you're wasting animal food. So just like animal food can be used for animals, you can't waste the animal food. And you're not allowed to squeeze them to make some type of I wouldn't say perfume, but some type of smelling thing. Even though you're allowed to use animal food to make a medical potion, but to make something to smell good for people, that's considered less. You're not allowed to make that out of animal food either. Excuse me, said that wrong. Even though if you're allowed to make it as a medical potion, you can make it as a smelling thing for people, even if it's regular animal food. It's not usually made for this because when there's a restriction not to make a medical ointment out of people food, that's out of people food. If it's usually used as a food, by you're not by using it as a rub, as an ointment, you're not using it for its best purpose, so it's not okay. But if you squeeze it for the ointment, since it's being consumed when you squeeze it, you're not allowed to use animal food for it either. So if you're using let's say it's a leaf, and you're using the leaf whole in some type of smelling thing, potpourri, using it for potpourri, then it's okay. But if you're squeezing it to put it in some type of glade, a spray, it's no longer solid, then that's not okay. Because once you're squeezing it, it's considered being consumed when you squeezed it, but you're not getting the benefit till you put it in the place where you want to have the nice smell. Okay, the Pasha Shulchan mentions that even when you pick this grass, whatever it is, to make the wheat soft, then that's worse than animal food, because he holds you're not allowed to soften the wheat in something which could be animal food. However, it does have kedusha shvius that you're not allowed to squeeze it to make it into a potpourri type thing. And some hold that if you gathered okay, I don't know what lahatin chitin is. I just don't know what. Oh, here's yours. Short. I don't know what this fine means. Okay, good base. You're allowed to sell people food or animal food and buy people food with the proceeds. You're not allowed to sell animal feed to buy other animal feed. So in general, in Tanakh, barley is animal food. I can't sell this barley to buy other barley. It's kind of similar right now. It sounds a little similar we saw last week. You can't, if you had olive oil, you can use it in your lamp. But if you sold your olive oil, you can't buy other olive oil with it. Because once you sold it, it's regular Shmita sanctity, and regular Shmita sanctity is to consume, to eat, usually not to burn. You're certainly not allowed to sell people food in order to buy animal food. But if you did buy them, or you exchanged or bartered animal food, people food for animal food, you're not allowed to make an ointment out of this animal food. Because since you bartered or sold it for people food, it now has the status of people food. And we already mentioned you're not allowed to make a medicinal ointment out of animal food. Excuse me, you are allowed to make it out of animal food, but not out of people food. Once you exchanged or sold human food for this now has the sanctity of human food. So you can't make it for a medicinal ointment out of it. So let's say you bought some type of bundle of vegetables and you put it on your roof and it dried out, and now it's only fit for an animal. You're allowed to feed it to your animal or to make it an ointment for a person as if it's animal food, even though before it dried out, it was people food. But since it dried out and it's not edible for a human, then it becomes ma'achal b'heima. That's what the Pasha Shulchan says. And it appears that this is only if it's only somewhat dried, that you can't get it moist again. There's some things when you dry out, sometimes you put them in a jar of water, they will become moist again and good. So we're not talking about something like that. That it dried out somewhat that you're not able to get it soft again to be people food even by boiling it. Then, so now that it's considered animal food, that it comes up a new halacha. Animal food, you're only allowed to give them raw. You're not allowed to cook it. But if you're able to get it soft again by either soaking it or by cooking it, and then it would be fit for human consumption again, then you're not allowed to feed it to your behemoth. So if it got a little bit dried out, but you could revive it, you're not allowed to give it to the behemoth. But if it got so dried out that you can't give it, that there's no way to revive it, either by soaking it in cool water or by boiling it, then you give it to your behemoth. And when the person eats it, when it's you've revived it now, you have to eat it with the sanctity of Shmita. Now, what if it dried out completely? That it's only okay for an animal. You're not allowed to sell it for animal food. Now it became animal food. You're not allowed to sell animal food for animal food. And if you bartered people food for a bundle of vegetables, and then that bundle of vegetables, because now that I bartered people food for it, it has kedusha shviyas. So let's say I picked some vegetables. Well, so I picked the vegetable. So meaning because some things become more strict when they've been sold in regard to Shmita. Because once it's been sold, you can only use it for highest and best use. When you bought it, even though it's animal food, the fact that it dried out, maybe it can go to animal food. But if I bought these and there was, and because the kedusha transfers the money and stuff, it becomes a little bit more strict. So if I bartered people food for this, now this has all the stringencies of people food, and then I put it on the roof and it dried up. I'm not allowed to make it into a malugma, because since it was exchanged from people food, it has all the stringencies of people food. So the fact that right now only an animal could eat it, I'm not allowed to make it into a medicinal ointment. And in this case, it would also be, you wouldn't be allowed to feed it to your animal either. So bartering or selling people food for this vegetable, which then became dried out, you're not allowed to give it to your behemoth anymore. It becomes too strict because you bartered it or because you had sold people food for it. And it appears from the Rash in the 7th chapter of the Mishnayos that you're allowed to use animal feed. Okay, so let's say I had a donkey, but I also have a dog. So we say you're not allowed to sell animal food even for animal food, but let's say I needed to sell donkey food to buy dog food, that's okay. Because I can't use this other food right now. I need the other food. So I could sell one type of animal food or food for one type of animal to buy for a different type of animal. And from the Rambam in this halacha, it seems that the prohibition of selling animal food to buy other animal food, it is to buy different animal food. Meaning, if I had animal A and now I'm buying a different thing, which animal A won't eat anymore, that's a problem. But if I sell, if I'm selling my donkey food for dog food, but the donkey will also eat the dog food, then there's no problem. So if you're selling, is it clear what I just said? So meaning if I want to sell donkey food for other donkey food or donkey food for dog food, according to the Rambam, you're not allowed to. But if you're buying, you're selling a more limited animal food for a more general animal food, this food is only good for my donkey. But if I'm selling it because I'm going to buy a food which is good for my donkey and my dog, I'm able to feed more animals with it, that's allowed. That's what the Rambam is saying here. Okay, and then a bundle of vegetables that you had bought for people food, from the Rambam in Hilchos Trumos, it appears that so that's when you buy it, and so like let's say, I don't know if this is a good example. It's not a perfect example, but when I was a kid, sometimes we would babysit a guinea pig, of our neighbor. And when we'd be at their house, when you would open up a green pepper, they would take the middle part with the seeds and give it to the guinea pig. So something like that, which is not really for human stuff, that's not a problem to give to the animal. But there's certain parts of the vegetables or leaves, maybe of some of the leaves of the vegetables, maybe that you sell them, but they're not really for people. That's what we're talking about. But let's say there's stuff that in the wholesaler, they already consider those leaves to be discards, not for human consumption. Then that is never people food. That's full-blown animal food. So these vegetables that we're talking about that you put on the roof, meaning they were sold as part of human consumption, but you decide, but you decided that you weren't necessarily going to be human consumption. But if they were sold to you already, in the wholesaler, they put the bundles of bad stuff, and even though it originally came from human food, but sometimes there's leaves of stuff, whatever, that's no good. So that's considered animal food. Let's just finish up quickly because we're a couple minutes late here. From the Pnei Moshe, which is a commentary on the Yerushalmi in the 7th chapter. This part of this vegetable is animal food, and it has the full status of animal food, except you do have to get rid of it when the time of the bior. And if you put it up onto your roof and it dried out, then it's considered bior. And then you'd have to make half. We just have 2 more lines. And if the wholesalers would already, make a pile of the discards and it got dried out that way, it's not even animal food. It's just as twigs, and then it's already like mavur, and it does not have any Shmita use anymore. I mean, any kedusha shvius anymore. So you wouldn't have to do bior because it's not Shmita produce anymore.